of where it is inside space, right? But for the actual construction of the objects or location of the objects, you'll use the same method, but you don't necessarily have to draw the entire grid prior to using that method, all right? So let's go ahead and I'll start the grid. And the way I'm going to start the grid is I'm going to start at one corner. I'm going to measure into the drawing, and I'll just go at 2-foot increments instead of at 1-foot increments. And so if I measure along my picture plane at 2-foot increments, and the last one is 28. So now I've measured in this direction, 2-foot increments, and I'm going to take each of those points and I'm going to go from that point to the opposite measuring point. I measured in from the right, I'm going to go to measuring point left, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that line, I'm going to give myself a mark along that baseline at each one of those increments, okay? So what does this do? This is going to help you establish depth off of this right-hand side wall, okay? And you can see what happens is as I move out, those points are getting further and further apart, and ideally they're getting further and further apart with sort of an equal increment as a progression, okay? Now the measuring points are only to establish depth and location inside of space, but the actual construction of the objects has to be from those points to vanishing points, either vanishing left or vanishing right. And I think what a lot of people do is they actually draw these lines thinking that those are the grid lines, and they're actually not. The grid lines have to converge at a vanishing point. So kind of like that, right? So if you look here, you can see that they're getting wider and wider and wider and wider and wider as we go across, right? So then the final step for the grids in this direction is to go to each of those points that I just made and go to the vanishing point opposite, the vanishing point left, okay? So I'm going from each of those points. And a lot of people will do these grids, and they'll do a series of grids at different horizon lines or different station points, and then just save the grids. So they end up with sort of like a library of grids. I guess that's okay. They used to actually sell these grids. You could buy them in packages, one for 1 point, for 2 point, right? I think it's a good idea to know how to do it on your own. Okay, so let's look at each of these. What these do, or what they're telling me, is that from this back wall, or in his plan, from this wall of this space, it's giving me depth, right? And we're going to need to do the same thing here. We're going to need to get depth here, because every point, you know, if I have an object inside of his space, no matter what its rotation, it is square off of this wall, a distance, square off of this wall, a distance, square off of that wall, a distance, right? Square off of that wall, a distance, right? So if I can locate these points, right, I can extrude the object vertically. Do you understand? That's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're going to be locating everything in your plan on this ground plane, and then we're just going to extrude it vertically, all right? So now I'll do the same thing in this direction. I'll go back again at 2-foot increments. And you know, if you're doing it for the first time, you might want to do it in a different color. Only because, yeah, only because you can do what I just did and mismark it. or just do something different for the mark, okay, so that you can see it. Because they're going to overlap at one point, and you want to make sure that you're always getting the correct mark.
Couldn't we use the intersection with the diagonal and
What would be wrong with that?
you can carry a mistake?
You can cover your mistakes?
Carry.
I'm sorry?
You can carry a mistake.
Carry your mistakes over? That would be a good thing?
No.
Am I misunderstanding? I don't know, try it, you know? So each one of these now, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just making myself a mark on the baseline. And when you're doing this layout part, keep your pencil really sharp. Because you're going to see as these things really get foreshortened, especially on this ground plane, you can be 6 inches off just in a pencil width, right? But we know that just like in the axon and in the 1 point, you know, there's a degree of this that is just sort of judgment, right? If it looks right, then it's right. If it looks like it's off, then go back and check it. Okay, same thing. I just go from this vanishing point to each of these points. And some people put another surface down on the drawing board, and they actually just stick pins in the vanishing points and in the measuring points, and that way the ruler is always on the measuring point and doesn't shift like I did on that last one. So you can actually put tacks in the board and then just pivot around those tacks. Okay, when you're doing this too, just like we did in the 1 point, and like some of you even did in the axon exercise, do the drawing in layers. Start drawing the stuff that's furthest away from you first. Like start drawing the stuff that's on the back walls, and then pull that off and put another sheet of trace down and draw the stuff that's in the foreground. And then at the end, just composite all those sheets. And anything that overlaps something else in space, of course, you just don't draw it, right? If the thing is overlapped, you're not going to show it. So that's a grid now, 2 foot by 2 foot on the ground plane, all right? How do we do heights? Well, heights are really easy because we know that we have, in this case, 2 measuring lines. In some cases, you may only have 1 datum that you can use vertically, depending on where the picture plane crosses. But we're actually cutting through the building. If I move the building up and just had this corner on the picture plane, I'd only be using that corner for measuring, right? Same thing, I'm just going to go up the side. In 2 foot increments. And now these will just go right to the vanishing point opposite. Did I just mess up your camera work?
No, you're right.
So I just take these straight back to that inside corner. was it. So now we have 2 foot increments running up the wall. What we can do after that is you can take any one of these points that you have at that rear baseline, and you just run those points vertically, right? And now you're putting that 2 foot grid up on the wall, right? And the same thing's going to happen as what happened on the ground plane. The further back toward the inside corner that I go, the more that these will appear to foreshorten. In other words, they will compress in this direction the further back I go, okay? Continue ad nauseum. So no matter what you're drawing in those future composited layers, you still need the horizon line, you still need the ground line, you still need the measuring point locations, right? Even if you're not using the grid, you still need all that basic information. You know, you don't need the station point anymore because you already set that up. You know, but you do need these points. You need these points, right? And the baselines. Doesn't hurt to have the baselines as well. So there's a 2 foot grid, 2 foot grid, right? Okay, so to locate something in space, let's say I want to locate something that's, I don't know, pick a strange number out. Let's say 7 foot 8 inches off of this wall in this direction. So because I always forget, I'm just going to go 7 foot 8 inches. And it'll be, say, 15 foot 6 inches off of this